Hello, I'm Glenn Woods, and I'm here at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. I'm one of the many instructors here in the clay section. We have hand building and throwing classes, so wherever your needs are, we'll be able to help you with that. I did a beginning instruction demonstration, but I'm going to do something a little more intermediate. I moved here from Chicago in 2001, and I've been teaching here at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center ever since then. But I've been throwing since high school, so 1975, maybe 74. Oh yeah, 74 was the first piece that I remember dating. Anyway, so I've got a little bit of experience, and I'd be happy to help you wherever you find yourself, beginning, intermediate, or advanced. I do tend to focus more on intermediate and advanced students, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about throwing a cylinder, because everything comes from a cylinder. And recently, I learned a few more tips. You know, it doesn't really matter how long you've been throwing or what your throwing style is. You tend to learn just a little bit of something that helps you hone your skills. So what I was referring to is a potter from California, whose name I cannot pronounce, so I won't even try. But he does, instead of the traditional pull, he does a thumb pull, and I'm going to demonstrate that today. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about also centering. Normally, when I'm talking to beginners, I talk just about the pressure point is here and here. But for intermediate and advanced students, I talk a little bit more about how we're moving this clay from the top down to the base. And our goal is to center this clay starting from the base and moving that clay up. So you won't be able to see much of it, but I'm using this part of my hand to move clay down to the base so that I can get a nice contact here at the base. So you see I've sealed the base here. And by moving the clay from the top down to the bottom, I'm already bringing it a little bit into center. So I'll do it again. The hand position here is same as if I was just doing the karate chop on top and this hand on the side. This hand is doing this, and this part of the hand is pulling the clay down to the base and then back up to cone it. So here we go. Push it down a little bit, take it all the way to the base. You want to linger here at the base just to make sure that's nice and centered, and then just bring that up into a cone. And then I use the same simple centering hand position to push it down. I'm going to do this about 3 times, and I do that just to make sure all the clay, even at the core of the piece, is pretty well centered and all the clay particles are moving in the same direction. And if I do that, all the steps that follow should be a little bit easier. You can see as I do that, it looks a lot smoother and it's a lot easier for me to center. So the last thing I do is I take my little finger, I go right down to the base and just make sure that's nice and clean. Now when you take your finger over the surface, you shouldn't have any kind of movement. That tells you you're ready for the next step, which is opening. And a lot of people will open with their thumbs, which is perfectly fine. Some people will drill down with one finger, but my preference is to lay my right hand over the top, and I take my left hand and I push the fingertips down until I get a little drag, add a little more water. And I'm going to go down until I have about a ½ inch left at the bottom. That may seem like a lot of clay to leave at the bottom, but if you leave too much clay, you can always trim that away. If you leave too little clay, then you spent all this time throwing this piece, and you may have to throw it away or alter it in some way just because there's not enough clay in the bottom to make the foot. So I'm going to just double check this, use my needle tool, push that down into the center, slide my finger down until it hits the clay. You can see I've got about a ½ inch there. So now I'm going to seal up that hole, and using the same hand position that I used to open this, I'm going to just pull my fingertips back to my center. I'm going to try to keep that as flat as possible. I'm going to just go about 3 inches wide. And of course, I went a little wider than 3, but that's okay. Now I'm going to push the clay back to the center to relieve all that tension that I've created by stretching the clay out. to open that. So because you're intermediate, I don't have to do this, but I'm just going to go over it. I centered, I coned it, centered again, I opened it, and I made the floor, and then I compressed the bottom by pushing the clay from the outside to the inside. Now I'm ready to go to the next step. We know that all forms, even a plate, you think of it as just a flat object, but you would make that flat object and stand the rim up into a teeny tiny little cylinder and then lay the rim back down again. So everything comes from a cylinder. So we're going to first, because of the way I open this up, the clay is kind of flared out. So my very first thing is I'm just going to change the direction of the wall from being flared to be more cone shaped. So I put my hand on the inside, and the outside hand is just pushing that clay into more of a cone. So I don't know if you're intermediate and you've thrown quite a bit, and with your first few pulls the piece is already flared too much. That's because you probably started with a straight up and down cylinder, and as you pull, the centrifugal force kind of brings that clay out. This thumb pull will help avoid that also. But once I've redirected the direction of the wall here, I compress the rim. Now I'm going to set myself up for the thumb pull. And what I do is my hand is on the inside, and I'm going to go under the hand and make an indentation on the outside here. And that's where my thumb is going to be positioned. And I like to use a sponge above my thumb so that it's applying water or slip right where my hands are going to be, or my thumb is going to be. So I added just enough water on the inside so my hand isn't dragging or skipping around. And I'm going to push this thumb up against the inside fingers. You see this part here is where the thumb goes. So if I do that, I'm just going to push that clay up to the top. So you can see my thumb. Okay, so once you get to the top, you compress that. I'm going to do one more thumb pull, and then I'm going to start pushing it into shape. So first thing you do is make that undercut. Now this is where, if it's going to give you problems, it's going to happen now, but we can address that a little bit later. So really slow movement from the bottom right up to the top. So because of that thumb pull, my elbow being locked into my leg, it keeps that cylinder nice and straight up and down. Before doing that, I would always have to collar this and keep trying to get that top under control, but this keeps the opening nice and narrow. All right, so the next thing I do is I use a straight rib, and I'm just going to take away this little apron off the outside. Just scrape that right off. A little extra clay you don't need. And if you're intermediate, you know that there's always clay hiding here in the bottom, so that helps get rid of some of it already. I'm just going to put a little bit of water on the inside and then a little bit on the outside, and the whole thing I'm doing right now is I'm just compressing this wall that I just made. Notice the rib is not moving, but my hand on the inside is. Once I run out of rib, I squeegee off all this extra clay here, and I'll reposition the rib. Okay, so now that I've got the cylinder thrown, some people like to use a torch to kind of stiffen this up a little bit, but I'm going to try not doing that and see if we can keep it standing upright. You can see I use a lot of different tools. These tools I've collected over the years. If you happen to be relocating and you're looking for tools, the Art Center does offer a nice little toolkit. You can purchase that here. So now what I'm going to do is give this a little bit of form, and what I like to do I meant to bring a sheet, but I like to sketch out my pieces so I know, am I going for a more bulbous form? I'm going to flare the top. What am I doing? In this case, I'm going to try to use this much of the clay for the body, and this much is going to be dedicated to the top of the piece. So let's see what happens here. A little bit of water so my hand doesn't stick on the inside. You can see when I push, there's a little lump that appears there that tells me where my hand is on the inside. What I'm going to do is, using this rib, this is a flexible metal rib, I'm going to create the shape, and then on the inside, I'm just pushing the clay into that shape. All right, so here we go. And I like to shape things in stages. So I'm first going to just suggest a little shape. And then I'm going to use another rib on the inside to exaggerate that shape. Unless, of course, this is all you're going for, that's fine. So what I want to do is take all the markings from the rib off the outside. And I'm doing that by just laying this metal rib on the surface, giving it the contour that I want, and then just from the inside, I'm just pushing the clay out to meet the rib instead of pressing the rib up against the piece. All right, so now this is a metal rib that one of my students has named the thumb. And I'm going to use this just to push from the inside. So I'm going to put this in, put this tiny little piece into the corner, the bottom of the piece, rock it out a little bit, and then just blend that into the side. You can see there's a little dancing going on, but when we stop the wheel, the dancing stops. So don't be too concerned about that. All right, so I'm going to wet my hand so that's nice and slippy. All right, so you can see there's a lump down there. Now what we want to do is we want to really change our focus from what we see happening on the outside to what we feel happening on the inside. Because we'll be trimming the extra clay away, and the outside clay, you see this little lump here, that's extra clay that I didn't pull up into the wall. So later I'll trim that away, but because I know I used this rib, I kind of know ahead of time what sort of contour this outside needs to take on. All right, so at this point, if I had my torch, which I don't, I would dry this a little bit so that I can be more aggressive at working on the top and not worrying so much about maybe the bottom is going to start slumping or moving on me. I'm going to give it a little more shape. All right, so imagine that this form that I've created, you know, when, like I said earlier, I really like to sketch out the pieces. And if I'm sketching them, I'm imagining two bowl shapes. So this is one bowl down here, and this is another bowl here. And then this piece is attached to the top of the bottom second bowl, or the top second bowl. That helps when you're designing a form to say, okay, I know that I'm making a tall bowl on the bottom and a shallow bowl at the top, or vice versa, instead of just letting the clay do what it wants to do. So now that I've got the bottom bowl pretty well done, I would normally dry that. I'm going to work a little bit on this top bowl. Just lift that up a little bit. Same thing with the rib. Just putting the rib on the inside and just pulling that up. So you can see how that changed the form. Remember, that lump there is going to be trimmed away. All right, so now I need to, then what I would do is dry that. So I've got the bottom part dried. I would have the shoulder dried. Now I'm going to be working on the top part. Again, it helps a lot if you sketch things out ahead of time so you kind of know where you're headed. I'm going to tip the top in a little bit. And then I'm going to collar this in. and tipping the top in. If you're throwing a cylinder and you're trying to collar it in, when you push that in, it makes the top flare. If I tip the top in, and then I try to collar it in, that kind of stands up. So hopefully you'll see that happening here in the demo. So I tipped it in here. I'm going to collar this in and watch how that just stands right up. A lot of people have problems with this step because they're fighting with the top that wants to flare out. So now I'm using a more traditional pull. One finger on the inside, one finger on the outside. So the question is, what happens if you do this and this starts to collapse a little bit on you? And these are how this is called a throwing stick. How this comes in handy is I will take the same flexible rib on the outside, and since I can't get my hand on the inside, I'm going to take this throwing stick and just push that up again to meet the rib. The rib isn't pushing up against the piece. It's just creating a void to push the clay into. All right, so I kind of like that shape just the way it is, and I think that's nice for intermediate. If you were more of an advanced student, you might want to work on doing something a little fancier with the top, or maybe a tall skinny neck. But I'm going to just use my rib on the outside to finish off this form. Give it a few accent marks. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little dip there on the shoulder that I don't really like. So I'm going to try to do this without ruining it. Put my rib there, and then use the stick to push that clay up into the rib. Okay, so that would be for the intermediate.